He summoned toads the size of houses, swallowed curses meant to erase gods, and sealed creatures that didn't belong to this world. But you've never heard that version of Jiraiya. In the oldest Japanese myths, he wasn't a teacher or a hero. He was a fugitive sorcerer, a shadow of vengeance who conjured poison storms and vanished through smoke before anyone could understand what had happened. His story wasn't written for children. It was carved in fear. Long before his name was softened by fiction, Jiraiya was a man consumed by loss, raised by spirits, and shaped by rage. His clan had been slaughtered by warlords. Their fortress burned with the screams still echoing. He survived 3 days beneath the ruins, drinking rain from the ashes and clutching a broken charm in his fist. That charm wasn't just jewelry. It was a seal, one of the few remnants of an ancient magic buried under centuries of blood and silence. When Jiraiya emerged, he didn't seek justice. He sought power. He wandered deep into the mountains, where roads ended and maps curled inward. There, in the swamps where humans dared not tread, he made a pact with something older than language. A great toad, its body covered in scars that pulsed like molten gold, spoke his true name aloud and called him apprentice. For 7 years, Jiraiya learned the secrets of toad sorcery, how to shape curses from breath, how to store venom in silence, how to see through lies by listening to frogs sing at night. When he returned to the world of men, he no longer walked like one. Those who wronged him died mysteriously, their skin blistered, their homes drowned in amphibian plagues, their blood turned to ink. Villages began whispering that a toad demon had awakened. But Jiraiya wasn't interested in revenge anymore. He had become something else, something that watched humanity from the edge of the forest, half man, half shadow, with scrolls on his back and spirits in his veins. He began targeting warlords, not for gold, but to dismantle their power. In one province, a daimyo who executed monks for refusing to bless his palace woke to find every pond on his estate boiling with toads. His guards vanished the next night. The daimyo tried to flee, but the bridges collapsed behind him. By the time his horse refused to move, the sky had darkened without clouds. Witnesses say Jiraiya walked straight through the gate without speaking, carrying a scroll that unrolled itself midair. The next morning, the palace was gone. In its place, a deep swamp, steaming and foul, with frogs croaking in perfect rhythm. No one rebuilt there. Word spread that Jiraiya could curse land itself. Other lords tried to hire him, thinking him a mercenary. He sent back the hands of their messengers, preserved in jars of slug slime. He never served power, but he didn't fight for justice either. He collected things, items others feared to touch. A blade forged from obsidian and sealed in paper, buried beneath a ruined shrine. A mirror said to show the face of one's enemy before they arrive. A bell that rang when someone lied nearby. He stored them in a hidden chamber beneath the roots of a dead tree and fed the roots with ink made from crushed spirit stones. Over time, people stopped calling him human. They whispered other names. Swamp Demon, Curse Bearer, the mouth of the Toad God. And still, he walked alone, followed only by silence and wet footprints that never dried. He didn't seek worship, but he was feared like one of the old kami that lived before memory. And it was during this time, when his name had become more warning than legend, that he crossed paths with her. She was unlike the others who approached him. Not afraid, not desperate, not curious. Her name was Sunade, and she waited by a stream where the water smelled of copper, seated calmly beside a slug the size of a cart. She didn't ask Jiraiya for protection or power. She offered knowledge. Sunade's magic came from decay, not destruction. She studied the life that thrived in rot, the fluids that broke bone, the silence of things decomposing. Jiraiya didn't speak to her for 3 days. On the 4th, he asked a question. She answered before he finished asking. He didn't smile, but he sat beside her. For months, Jiraiya and Sunade traveled together, avoiding cities, hunting cursed relics. She showed him how to turn poison into a seal. He taught her how to bend sound to shatter bone. They never called themselves allies, but they stopped walking apart. In one village, they found a well that bled. Every time someone drew water, it came out warm and red. The locals thought it was a spirit. Sunade knew better. She lowered a string soaked in healing ink. It caught on something heavy. When she pulled, what came up wasn't a spirit or a curse, but a jar, sealed with wax and marked with Orochi script, a language thought to be extinct. Jiraiya shattered it instantly. Inside was a scroll bound in human skin. The writing moved on its own, lines shifting like worms. It was a fragment of a forbidden technique. Not a weapon, but a summoning. One that required no voice, no blood, only silence. They burned it that night, but the fire turned green and screamed. 3 frogs nearby exploded. Jiraiya said nothing. Sunade watched him from across the flames, and for the first time, wondered if he feared something. That was when she mentioned a boy, a former student of Jiraiya, pale, brilliant, dangerous. His name was Orochimaru. Sunade had met him once, in a temple where the monks had been turned to salt. Orochimaru had been standing alone, barefoot in snow that hadn't fallen. He hadn't blinked the entire time. Jiraiya listened, then stood up and walked into the woods. He didn't return for 2 days. When he did, he was carrying a snake nailed to a branch, its body shaped into the form of a spiral. He hung it from a tree and set it on fire, muttering words Sunade had never heard before. From that day forward, their path changed. No longer hunters of curses. Now they were being hunted by one. Orochimaru's presence wasn't announced by noise or violence. It arrived slowly, through signs no one else recognized. Frogs began refusing to speak. Forests that once whispered secrets went silent. Dead animals were found arranged in patterns, eyes peeled open. Jiraiya and Sunade moved constantly, following rumors of vanishing shrines and reversed prayers. In one village, every scroll in the temple had turned blank overnight. The priest had torn out his own tongue. On a mountain pass, they found a merchant caravan frozen in place. People, animals, even the flames in their lanterns, locked in a moment that wouldn't end. Sunade reached into the stillness with a charm carved from bone, but it cracked in her hand. Jiraiya stepped forward and whispered a single name. The spell shattered. Everything fell at once, like broken pottery. They knew Orochimaru was testing his limits, that he wasn't interested in killing, but in rewriting the rules that kept death separate from thought. One night, a message appeared on Jiraiya's tent, written in ash. No hand had touched it. No one saw it form. It said, "You left me behind." Jiraiya didn't sleep that night. By dawn, Sunade found him drawing a new seal. Not one of defense or attack, but one that erased footprints. From that day, they left no trace. No scent, no breath, no reflection. But even that wasn't enough. They began to feel watched. Sunade's slug familiar trembled in her sleep. Jiraiya's toads refused to leave their summoning circle. And then, during a storm that brought no rain, they found the first body. One of Jiraiya's old disciples, buried upside down in sand, eyes replaced by scales. There was no blood. Only a single coin in his mouth, carved with the spiral again. Jiraiya stared at it for a long time, then swallowed it whole. He said it needed to be hidden in something that couldn't be read. Sunade said nothing, but she knew what that meant. Orochimaru was no longer just hunting them. He was sending pieces of himself ahead. And Jiraiya, for the first time since becoming a sorcerer, looked afraid. That same night, the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Every candle extinguished itself. Every frog hid underground. And Sunade's slug familiar burst into fluid and vanished. A circle of silence surrounded their camp, and Jiraiya stood at its center, holding a scroll that bled ink from its edges. Across the trees, something moved without steps. It didn't breathe. It pulsed. When it entered the clearing, it wore a face that wasn't human. Orochimaru had changed. His skin shimmered like glass, and his voice echoed before he opened his mouth. "You shouldn't have left me." Jiraiya didn't answer. He placed the scroll into the dirt and sealed it with blood. Sunade stepped back, recognizing the pattern. It was a one-way invocation, a spell that summoned something at the cost of never calling it again. Orochimaru raised his hand. Behind him, the trees bent inward. Snakes poured from the branches, mouths opened, fangs melted into hooks. Jiraiya's toads appeared uncalled, surrounding him, their bodies bloated and shivering. Then everything fell silent again. Jiraiya moved first. He didn't chant. He didn't shout. He clapped his hands once, and the seal ignited. The ground cracked. The sky flickered. One of the toads exploded, sending shards of bone into the snakes. Orochimaru stepped through the chaos untouched, his form phasing like liquid. He reached Jiraiya in seconds, claws raised, mouth open wide enough to swallow a man whole. Jiraiya struck with both palms, sealing symbols blooming across Orochimaru's chest. The serpent screamed, splitting in half, revealing another Orochimaru inside, smaller, younger, grinning. "You only ever taught me half the words," he said. Then the forest collapsed inward. The collapse wasn't physical. The trees bent without breaking. The air thinned without movement. It was the world itself recoiling. Orochimaru stepped forward as if walking through syrup, each motion leaving behind fragments of himself, echoes of a form too unstable to stay whole. Jiraiya's skin was blistering, not from fire, but from being too close to something that didn't belong to this world. Sunade tried to approach, but the space between her and Jiraiya stretched like pulled silk, folding reality between them. Jiraiya turned his head slightly, enough to meet her gaze. She saw his left eye bleeding, the pupil shaped like a spiral. He mouthed one word, "Run." She hesitated, but only for a breath. Then she drew a seal across her chest and vanished in a burst of steam and salt, leaving behind the faint scent of iron. Orochimaru laughed. His voice sounded like bone grinding through water. "You always send people away. Is that the lesson you never wrote down?" Jiraiya didn't respond. He dropped to his knees and pressed both hands to the soil. A pattern of glyphs bloomed outward in all directions, pulsing green, then black, then green again. The forest began to bend inward, as if the space itself was folding. The toads howled in pain. Orochimaru hissed and raised a curtain of serpents from his back, each one etched with runes. They lunged. Jiraiya took the hit. He didn't block it. He absorbed it, letting the fangs tear into his chest as he spoke the final part of the spell. His voice cracked. Blood spilled from his mouth. The glyphs turned solid. Time stilled. For a moment, the world hung like a blade. Orochimaru froze mid-step, mid-smile, mid-sentence. The snakes turned to ink and splashed to the ground. The trees straightened. Jiraiya stood, barely, arms shaking. He walked toward his former student, whose body was locked in space, unmoving but aware. His eyes followed Jiraiya with fury and something deeper fear. Jiraiya drew one last scroll from within his robe. It wasn't written in ink. It was burned into the paper, scarred with fire and bone. He pressed it to Orochimaru's chest. "This is where your name ends," he said. Then he bit down on his own tongue and spat blood across the scroll. It ignited silently. Light didn't spread. It vanished, and with it, Orochimaru. The silence afterward was unbearable. Jiraiya staggered backward and fell to his knees. He looked down at his hands. One was missing. He hadn't felt it happen. His body was unraveling, not dying, but breaking apart in layers. He reached for a stone to carve something. The stone melted. So he touched the dirt with his finger and began to trace, not words, a spiral, over and over, burning it into the ground with what remained of his essence. When he could no longer move, he pressed his hand into the center. The mark pulsed once, then held. A toad approached, small, eyes wide. It croaked once. Jiraiya raised what remained of his hand and touched the creature's head. The toad blinked, and its eyes turned black, etched with the same spiral. And Jiraiya was gone. Sunade returned a day later. She found no body. She stood over it for a long time, holding a vial of his blood, but she didn't pour it. She watched the mark, waited, hoped maybe. Nothing happened. After an hour, she dropped the vial and crushed it beneath her heel. Then she walked away, but not out of grief. Something in her had closed, or cracked. No one saw her for months. And when she did return to the world, her healing magic had changed. Less restoration, more extraction. Her seals left scars. Her slugs began to hiss in sleep. And she never said Jiraiya's name again. But the ones who remembered him, the villagers he saved, the shrines he silenced, the monks he unnerved, told stories long after he vanished. Stories of spells written in mud, of rivers turning to ink, of toads that refused to die. And in these stories, he wasn't the mentor. He wasn't a hero. He was the man you summoned when something worse had already come. Long before Sunade, long before Orochimaru, Jiraiya had walked alone into places that should not exist. His legend wasn't built on teachings. It was built on what he was willing to erase. And now, to understand him, we return to the things he tried to leave buried. He once crossed a village where the earth refused to hold footprints. Every step made sank into the soil and vanished without trace. The people there had no shadows. They spoke without sound and dreamed in fragments. A traveling monk had brought with him a mirror he claimed revealed the soul's true weight. Within days of arriving, the village lost all memory of its founding. Jiraiya arrived not to help, but to retrieve the mirror. It was forged from obsidian and lacquered bone, and its frame was inscribed with names that no longer belonged to living things. When Jiraiya picked it up, his reflection didn't move. It smiled. He carried it for 3 days without sleeping, wrapped in cloth that bled through each morning. On the 4th night, he buried it under a dry well and sealed it with a blood lock so specific it required the scream of a dying frog to undo. He never told anyone where the village was. When others asked, he said the mirror had taken it with it. In another province, Jiraiya was summoned by a woman whose husband had turned into wind. She swore he still spoke to her, that his voice came through the shutters, asking for fire. At first, Jiraiya refused. He didn't deal with spirits shaped by grief, but the woman sent him a lock of her husband's hair. It hadn't stopped growing. Jiraiya burned the lock. It screamed. He knew then it wasn't grief. It was mimicry, something pretending to be lost to lure her into a pact. He followed the wind across 7 mountains and found its heart hidden in a dead tree that never decayed. Inside, the air was made of whispers. Jiraiya carved 7 toad sigils into the bark and fed the tree venom until it shriveled. The wind tried to escape through his lungs. He swallowed it, stitched his own throat shut, and drank 3 days of silence before he spoke again. When he returned to the woman, her house had aged 100 years in his absence. She was gone, but a pile of ash remained where her bed had been. He didn't ask what it meant. He only carved a spiral on the door and left. There was a temple at the edge of the Shokuzai forest that rang with bells no one had hung. Pilgrims who entered it never returned with the same number of bones. Jiraiya arrived wearing a robe soaked in rainwater mixed with ink. At the entrance, he placed 5 toads in a circle. Each one began to vomit smoke. When he stepped inside, the walls tried to move. They pressed inward, trying to remember the shape of men who had come before. He didn't resist. He let the walls wrap around him. Then he whispered the name of the original bell ringer, a monk who had chanted himself into non-existence. The temple wept oil. Its roof collapsed in reverse, and beneath the foundation, Jiraiya found a box sealed with prayers that had teeth. He didn't open it. He fed it to one of his toads, which turned inside out and hopped away, still breathing. He marked the foundation with a spiral so wide it could only be seen from above. A temple never rebuilt, and the forest grew quiet for decades. These stories were not passed down through scrolls. They were carved into the teeth of those who survived. None of them show a man teaching. None of them speak of Jiraiya as protector or sage. He wasn't called when people wanted hope. He was called when they had seen something that should not exist. And each time, he took something with him. A voice, a relic, a person, or part of himself. There was a district near the border of 3 clans where time had stopped counting. The sun rose, but it never moved. Shadows were fixed, and children didn't grow. Crops rotted in perfect symmetry. When emissaries from the capital tried to enter, their footsteps repeated. Same sound, same position, same breath, as if the ground remembered and refused to allow change. Jiraiya was not invited. He arrived unannounced, dragging a wheel made of bark and bone, inscribed with a single phrase, "Time is not a law." The villagers gathered, but none spoke. Their mouths moved, but their words came out in the wrong order, sentences broken into loops. Jiraiya walked to the village center and placed the wheel upright in the soil. He spun it once. Everything paused. Then the wheel shattered, and so did the sky above the district. It cracked like glass. A second sun blinked once, then vanished. The real one began to move again. Shadows twitched. Crops collapsed. The villagers screamed, as if aging all at once. Some fell and turned to dust. Others clutched their throats, weeping words that had been stuck for years. Jiraiya didn't stay. He took with him a stone from the village's shrine, one that pulsed every 7 seconds. No one ever found out what it measured. Another tale speaks of the Morning Lake, a body of water that never reflected anything. Birds avoided it, trees bent away. Fishermen who crossed it would row in circles until their skin paled and their eyes turned backward. Jiraiya came at dusk, wearing no cloak, no symbols. Only skin, marked in lines of raw spellwork. He stepped into the water. It hissed and flattened like glass. A figure rose from the center of the lake, shaped like a man, but with no mouth or fingers. It held nothing. But the absence of that nothing pressed against the shore like a scream. Jiraiya didn't attack. He knelt. The lake boiled. The figure approached, and Jiraiya placed his forehead to the water. A ripple shot outward, shattering the surface. When it cleared, Jiraiya was gone. For 3 days, the lake bubbled and no wind touched it. Then, without warning, he emerged, gasping, dragging behind him a scroll made entirely of teeth. He never opened it. He wrapped it in salted silk and buried it under the oldest tree in the nearest town. Years later, that tree began to produce fruit that whispered at night. People tried to cut it down. Their blades snapped. Eventually, they stopped trying. There was also the salt orchard, a grove where every tree wept saline and grew bark like scales. The villagers nearby believed the orchard was alive, hungry, and filled with voices that did not belong to the dead. Travelers said they heard entire arguments inside the trunks. Jiraiya came not to silence it, but to ask it a question. He carved a spiral into the ground outside the orchard and waited. The trees bent toward him. Their salt hardened into faces, dozens of them, none human. He asked, "What did you bury here?" The trees answered with a tremor. Jiraiya dug for 7 hours until his hands bled. What he found was a skeleton made of folded paper, each bone covered in ink. It was still breathing. He set it on fire and scattered the ashes across 7 mountains. The orchard never spoke again, but some say the salt it left behind still remembers the shape of his voice. These were the things Jiraiya did when he was alone. Not training, not teaching. Walking into places already cursed and leaving behind something worse. People feared him not because of what he fought, but because of what he allowed to exist only long enough to erase it properly. His legend was not about saving lives. It was about sealing things that should never have touched this world. And for each one, he gave up something in return. Memory, language, blood, or names that once belonged to him, but now only echo in the mouths of toads. And yet, none of those stories were what broke him. The one that left no survivors, but a silence so deep it cracked even Sunade. Because when Orochimaru turned against him, it wasn't with a sword or a curse. It was with memory. Twisted, weaponized, fed back into Jiraiya like poison disguised as nostalgia. Orochimaru knew every seal Jiraiya had ever created. He knew which words would make a summoning fail, which gestures would stall a spell mid-air, which hand position would make a toad explode instead of appear. But most of all, Orochimaru knew where Jiraiya had been, and he had walked into those old scars, peeled them open, and built something inside them. That was the betrayal, not the rebellion, the trespass. Orochimaru didn't invent a new darkness. He climbed into the ones Jiraiya had buried and pulled their teeth out one by one. And Sunade, who had watched it unfold, who had tasted that venom secondhand, changed forever. She didn't speak his name not out of grief, but because it had become dangerous. There are records she destroyed, spells she unlearned, animals she banished, to keep the world from finding him again. Because he became a legend so dangerous that even remembering it wrong could trigger something buried. That's why no one tells the full version. That's why the stories break off halfway. That's why scrolls mentioning him tend to burn at the edges, or disappear altogether. And that's why the version you know, the smiling old man, the mentor, the one who falls and leaves behind a book, is safer. It's a shadow. The real Jiraiya from Japanese mythology didn't die. He wasn't buried. He was erased. The places he touched are sealed. The names he wore are forbidden. And the one person who could bring him back, Sunade, chose silence instead. Not to honor him, to contain him. Because what would return wouldn't be a man. It would be the sum of everything he destroyed. And if someone dares to cast the spell to bring him back, it won't be Jiraiya who answers. It will be the curse he became. Bound to no master, answering to no name.